Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to another Indie Game Friday, where each week I take a look at a different independent role-playing game. This week I'm making good on following up on the sequel to last week's game. Usurper, developed by Steve Gall and published by Pugware, is the sequel to Shrouded Insanity, and was released on Steam on February 20th, 2018. As I mentioned, Usurper is the sequel to Shrouded Insanity, but it is a very different game. Whereas Shrouded Insanity was a overhead view, room-based action RPG, Usurper is a side-scrolling Metroidvania. The RPG elements are arguably stronger in Usurper, while the gothic aesthetic introduced in Shrouded Insanity is further refined. For the story, Usurper starts at some point after Shrouded Insanity. In it, the parasite Waltham is tossed into a flying citadel. He takes residence in the body of one of the deceased knights, who is then raised into an undead state, and sets forth to do as Waltham directs. During the game, they will encounter all manner of corrupt and eldritch beings, with even allies appearing directly ripped from Lovecraftian horror. Gameplay is typical of Metroidvania-inspired offerings. You can move about in linked, platform-based 2D side-scrolling scenes that can offer multiple exits on multiple levels, each leading to a different section. Some sections may be inaccessible until a certain relic or spell is in use, often requiring the defeat of a boss. Some areas may be accessible but contain foes that are more readily dealt with once you've gained some experience or certain weapons. Basic combat involves a focus system using something called Guard. Basic attacks involve swinging your weapon, and you can dodge roll through enemy attacks. You can also summon a magical shield. Summoning a shield against ranged attacks or dodge rolling takes Guard, as does swinging a weapon. But if you successfully roll through an attack or deflect an attack with a magical barrier, you can actually regain much more Guard than the action takes, resulting in a net gain. This is supposed to encourage you to charge and engage enemies rather than keeping your distance, although this may take some getting used to. Guard is also useful because it can absorb damage you take if it is positive. If it is negative, damage goes through directly to your health, and aside from one last stand chance allowed for every single life, you can actually easily get one rounded if your guard is negative when you get hit. During play, you can pick up different weapons, which can be equipped in up to 4 quick slots. Each weapon has a damage rating as well as how much focus it takes to swing, and a chance to stagger an enemy if it hits. Each weapon has its own art and swing speed as well, although it quickly becomes apparent that despite the number of weapons, a fair amount of them are simply upgrades or reskins of other weapons. Vitae and Yithstones make a return from the first game and are used as currency in this one as well, although once again, Yithstones are the more limiting factor. You don't actually have to gather the Vitae this time, it's done automatically when you defeat an enemy, and if you perish, returning near to where you died will automatically recover the Vitae you dropped. Yithstones stay with you and are found in chests this time. They're used in most relevant purchases. Shortly after starting the game, you reach your first save point, where you can save the game but also level up your individual abilities. Each ability requires increasing amounts of Vitae and a Yithstone to level up, and they're generally soft-capped at 30, with a hard cap much higher. There's Constitution that affects your health, Luck that affects crit chance and item drop, Dexterity, Intelligence, and Strength that each affect the scaling of weapons associated with their respective ability, Guard that affects your guard points, Defense that affects damage taken, and finally Eldritch, which functions as a sort of lore stat. Around that save point are various merchants and NPCs that can offer boons, trade Yithstones for Vitae, offer spells and pet services, and so forth. Pets are an interesting part of the game because they're creatures that automatically follow you around once you gain them, attacking your enemies with a particular attack pattern and sometimes offering special abilities such as Light to see by. They are pretty generally helpful to have. Between getting different weapons, equipping certain spells that may or may not require ammunition, customizing your character's stats, and acquiring certain relics during play, the RPG portion of this game is a bit more in-depth than its predecessor, although it remains quite close to the genre that it mimics. Graphically, the game retains the excellent pixel art style of its predecessor, and some of the monster types from the first game make a return, although they're joined by a number of other strange Lovecraftian horrors. Animations are fluid, and the areas that you can go through are actually very well detailed, if a bit on the strange side due to the supernatural setting. Oddly enough, the place I feel the game fails furthest in, at least graphically, is with the portrait art, as it's not done in a pixel-based style, but rather a hand-drawn style. It's done well enough, I suppose, but it seems slightly out of place for the rest of the game, although it does maintain a similar overall feel. The combat system is neat at first, but once you get used to it, a lot of the challenge begins to fade away. The ability to spam dodge rolls and weapon attacks can make most standard enemies seem relatively trivial, especially with the long wind-up animations that most of their attacks take, while bosses are only slightly more dangerous. Now that's not to say that the system isn't well done, I'm just not sure if it mimics what the design team was actually going for. What I found most challenging were either enemies that I wasn't aware of, in other words, the first time I visited an area, or creatures that were randomly generated. Both times, these things took me by surprise. And yes, if you bust some background objects or try to open some chests or coffins that you've already opened up, enemies can actually hop out unexpectedly. It does mix things up overall, I guess, but it can be a nasty surprise. Another issue I personally had is that while the game pretty much screams for a game controller, and the game does indeed support controllers, I found that my controller in particular didn't seem to be able to access some critical functions of the game, specifically the inventory management system and hotkeys for weapons. At least in the build that I was playing for this review. It may be corrected later because it's still in active updates. While I was inclined to blame my controller, I did notice that some other people in the reviews on the game had similar problems, while others had no problems whatsoever, so it may be something to watch out for. Further, the functions in question can't really even be triggered off of keyboard while the controller is plugged in, since it prioritizes the controller, and rightly so. Now, if you do end up having this issue, I will say that the keyboard and the mouse alternative setup is not too bad. I found the game was certainly playable just like that. All in all, I would say that I actually thought Usurper was a better game than its predecessor, which actually wasn't a bad game at all. I'll admit that there's better Metroidvanias out there, even ones with a similar Lovecraftian theme, but Usurper holds its own for its price. There will be a third game in the series, and in fact it's already got an early access page up as of this recording, but I think I'm going to wait to review that one until it hits full release later this year. Once again, it changes the type of game entirely, while maintaining setting and continuity, which I find to be an interesting way to make a trilogy, where each game plays like an entirely different genre. On that note, I think I'll leave it here though. The link will be in the description below as always. This has been the RPG Crawler with Indie Game Friday, Usurper. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you've got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. If you're feeling particularly generous, I do have a Patreon that goes towards supporting this channel at patreon.com/rpgcrawler. Until next time, take care and goodbye.